Hey YouTube, Andrew Sellers here, and as y'all can see, I am about to profile my premium Overlord deck profile. So, I am admittedly a little late on trying to get this deck underway, but my reason for that is because I haven't been able to complete the deck, and I haven't been able to do that mainly for financial reasons. There will be proxies in this deck as a heads up, but eventually, when I can afford to, I will make the modifications. Anyways, onto the deck profile. Starting off, we have G Lizard Soldier Conroe. So I know there's people that prefer to use the V starter, but in my opinion, Conroe's actually more useful of a card. Because unlike with the starter, I mean, yeah, it does have a cost, unlike the V starter, but I think the cost is absolutely worth it because you counterblast 1 for a guaranteed grade 1 PG or grade 0 heal. Whereas with the V starter, you literally just get a random card. I mean, I like that the V starter's free, but I think the cost for getting a guaranteed card that you'll really want is even nicer. Next up, for triggers, standard OT, needs no explanation. For now, I am running 4 of the grade 0 heals. So eventually, I'll be replacing this with 2 of the countercharging heals and 2 of the grade 3 heals. The grade 3 heals you'll need for early game matches. And my reason for playing the countercharging heal is because Overlord uses up a lot of counterblasting, and having those extra counterchargers will be real handy. Now for crits, you run 11 of them. So, this is staying in the deck no matter what. Eventually, I'm going to be taking these out for stride crits. And eventually, I'll be taking these out for more copies of her. And that is it for my trigger lineup. Next up, 3 copies of Halbei. Halbei's pretty much there for the same reason as it is in standard, except you actually get to search it with Conroe. I mean, you do the same thing with Bar, but well, it's literally there for the same reason as it is in standard. Maintaining hand size. Next up, 4 copies of Lava Flow Dragon. He's mainly there because, in my opinion, he's the only good first right in the deck. He's a good searcher, and he's a decent rear guard to have as a 15k booster. Next up, 4 copies of Lizard General Conroe. In my opinion, he's the deck's best searcher, because you get to have the Overlord unit you really need, and then you do have to discard a card, but it's a really nice guaranteed searching grade 1 to have, and it's a great countercharger as well. Next up, your PG lineup. This guy's there for hand sizing purposes and because you can search it with Conroe, and Sanctitude's there for obvious reasons. Next up, I have 4 copies of Prowling Dragon Striken. When Striken's ridden upon, your Vanguard gets plus 5,000 and a crit. It can't attack while it's on Vanguard, but giving your Vanguard a free plus 5k and a crit is a sweet payoff for this deck. Next up, for Igneo Road Dragon. These guys are proxies for Igneo Road. And when Igneo Road's placed on Vanguard or Rearguard, you get to check the top 5, and if you end up getting to take a Dragonic Overlord VX, you get to have that. And each time your Vanguard attacks, while this guy's on Rearguard, he gets plus 5,000 power. Next up, 2 copies of Torrid Cannon. He's there as your Overlord Recycler and for helping maintain hand size. Now for grade 3s, 4 copies of The End. So the only reason this guy's in here now is because he's a proxy for The End. I've also legitimately tested out Standard The End in Premium to see how it would do. And I've ended up learning the hard way in Casual that it's not that good. My reason for thinking that is because, based on my experience, it does the same thing The End does, but with a counterblast. So I strongly recommend to not use Standard The End at all and just stick with The End. And finally for grade 3s, 4 copies of the X, 2 of the Legion version, and 2 of the V version. The V version is definitely the unit you want to have as your first ride in the deck, so that you can get a Force 2 marker, and so that he can rush your opponent early on before you ride Legion DX. And Legion DX is there for recycling triggers, getting a copy of The End to Legion it with, and because it's actually a bit stronger than VDX is. And now, for my G-Zone. In my personal opinion, nothing aside from the G-Guardians is particularly mandatory, but I will go show off my strides and go over why I use them. First up, 2 copies of the Purge. So ideally you'll want to run the Purge at 1, but my reason for running it at 2 is because one of them's flip footer. And as for the copy of the Purge you want to stride, you'll only want to stride it in certain situations. You mainly want to stride it if you have a stride into it, if you have an Overlord unit in your hand while your opponent's at 4 damage specifically, or if your opponent's at 5 damage straight up, so you can have a guaranteed quintuple drive. Next up, 2 copies of Ziegenberg. Very consistent restandard for this deck in my opinion. And because your heart would technically be an Overlord unit, you can discard Halberd to restand this guy if your opponent actually has more rear guards than you do. Next up, 2 copies of Dumjid Valor. Though, despite that Valor isn't as much of a chance-taking card as Ziegenberg is, it is better in certain situations. Next up, Once the Breeze. Literally, because he's literally for the situations that he can be used in. And now the Zeroth Dragons. Gilgal and Drachma. Gilgal's there so that you can have free strides for the rest of the game if you choose to stride into it, and because he's a damn good countercharger. And Drachma's there as your finisher. Well, one of your finishers. And, finally for strides, 2 Novo Veg. Novo Veg is your other finisher in the deck. And now for G-Guardians. First up, 2 Denial Griffin. Counterblast 1 and you were... Counterblast 1 on an attacking rearguard, and... I have friends that absolutely despise this card and really want it banned. I'm gonna be honest, Denial Griffin is actually the best G-Guardian in the game. But to be fair about it, I think the reason they made Denial Griffin so broken is because Kagero doesn't have a lot of good G-Guards. In my opinion, Defeat Flare Dragon's a good G-Guard to use in Overlord, but Denial Griffin's just a better card overall, and it's the only good Kagero G-Guard for other Kagero decks like Blade Master. 2 copies of Absalom. Absalom's only good if your opponent doesn't have very many rearguards. But it's a pretty good card. And finally, 1 Defeat Flare Dragon. My whole reason for running him is because you get to recycle Overlord units. I mean, the back row retiring skill is pretty nice, but I find the Overlord recycling skill to be so much more convenient. Anyways, that is it for my premium Overlord deck. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe for more content from my channel, and I'll be sure to keep uploading more and more of it. Have a nice day, y'all. See you later.